Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi and other top officials died in a helicopter crash Sunday in the mountains of northern Iran.
I was shocked. I couldn't really believe the news alerts that I was reading on my phone. This is, airplane crashes and helicopter crashes happen. But, President Raisi was a very, very senior figure within the Iranian political establishment.
That's Yeganeh Torbati, a financial investigative reporter for The Post who has covered Iran for years. And she's been closely following the aftermath of Raisi's death. Inside Iran, the government announced 5 days of national mourning. The country's allies sent their condolences. But Yeganeh says not everyone is grieving. Raisi was seen by many Iranians as a key player in some of the Iranian government's worst human rights abuses.
So what I saw was a lot of Iranians openly celebrating this news. They were, showing videos of themselves dancing, buying sweets for themselves and their family, and handing them out. They were really quite joyful at the news of Raisi's crash and then death.
Yeganeh says we can't know how representative those reactions are of overall public opinion inside of Iran. But she says they tell us something about how Iran's government is viewed. It's run ultimately by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Raisi was Iran's top elected official, and he was viewed as Khamenei's potential successor.
For me, what's top of mind is sort of what does this mean for Iran in the medium to long term and in terms of how Iran is run. And then also I've been looking really closely at sort of the reactions of Iranians to the death. And those reactions, I think, really tell you a lot about where Iranian society is vis-a-vis the government.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Monday, May 20th. Today, the death of Iran's president and what this means for the country's future. So, Yeganeh, I want to step back and just talk a little bit more about what do we know right now about how the Iranian president died and who else was with him?
Right. So what we know is that his helicopter was flying in inclement weather. It was quite foggy. He was flying back from the inauguration of a dam project that Iran was building with Azerbaijan. And his helicopter, which was decades old, crashed in northern Iran. And he was flying with Iran's foreign minister and a convoy of other officials.
And then, Yeganeh, what happens next in the immediate? And then what will you be looking at in the long term?
So what immediately happens is we have a temporary president, which is Mohammad Mokhber. And he's someone who has sort of spent his career really at the nexus of money and power in the Islamic Republic. He, for close to 15 years, headed a conglomerate controlled by Khamenei that has its hands in sort of all areas of the Iranian economy. He's now the president temporarily and holds those powers. But then within the next couple months, we will likely be seeing a new round of presidential elections.
So, Yeganeh, I want to get to what, if any, ramifications have come from this death, given Iran's governance structure. But before we even get to that, I wanted to talk about first Ebrahim Raisi's reputation and legacy. How would you describe it?
He's someone who was really elevated by the revolution. He was 18 when it happened and very quickly started to enter into roles, where he had a role in judicial sentencing and kind of played a senior role when it came to crime and punishment in the Islamic Republic. Most notably, he has been linked by human rights groups to one of the biggest human rights abuses, throughout the 45-year history of the Islamic Republic, which is the mass execution of prisoners in 1988. And what is claimed is that he basically served on effectively like a death committee that kind of quickly ruled on whether a prisoner would be executed or not. He has never directly denied those claims. When asked about it quite directly by a reporter in 2021, he basically said that he had always defended human rights in his roles, and that judges or prosecutors who defend security should be praised and should be proud of their actions. So that is his legacy for a lot of Iranians. In their reactions to his death, many were simply calling him by the Persian word for executioner online.
Which is what?
Jallad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about how he became president.
His election was sort of seen as ordained, and he had kind of been seen as anointed by the conservative establishment. And even though that election had one of the lowest turnouts, actually the lowest turnout for a presidential election in the history of the Islamic Republic. He did win, and he became the president in 2021.
I think it's useful at this point to actually talk through how Iran is governed, because I think a lot of people, when they heard that the Iranian president died, assumed that this was an individual who actually has a lot of power, and there are huge ramifications for this. So can you just talk me through the president's role within the infrastructure of how Iran is governed and who really is in charge?
Right. Iran has both these sort of elected elements and then also these unelected elements. And when it comes down to it, it's the unelected officials, particularly Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who have the main power in Iran. The president can sort of set the tone domestically, especially, and sort of decide some things that govern how Iranians live their lives. But it's the Supreme Leader who decides on foreign policy, who controls the military and the judiciary as well, the police forces, the intelligence forces, really the major organs of Iranian political life that determine, Iran's policies and how the state interacts with the people. But there's also the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a military organization that oversees its own intelligence agency. It has shock troops that it deploys into the streets to, suppress protests. And it also has a lot of economic power. And over the last, 10, 20 years, a lot of IRGC members have gone into politics. And so they also wield actual political power.
In hearing you talk, what I'm hearing is, if we could just really simplify it, that this is a government and a country where you might have separate branches of government, but there's not this equal balance of power. Like in the U.S., we think of checks and balances, but really in Iran, the check and the balance is the supreme leader, right?
That's absolutely correct. Now, it's not to say that the president has no impact whatsoever, but it's really quite limited, and it's sort of more in the execution of policies that are set by, both the supreme leader and then to some extent the military forces, especially the Revolutionary Guards.
And how would you describe how Raisi executed on some of these policies of the supreme leader?
Well, Raisi's views were very much in line with those of Khamenei, who is a very conservative figure and has skepticism for the United States and is not open to dissent or sort of the flourishing of Iranian civil society. So the way that he kind of carried things out was very much in line with that perspective. And under Raisi, what we really did see most notably was a huge sort of increase in the brutality and activity of the morality police in Iran. And that was particularly true in sort of the summer months of 2022. And that led directly to the death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman in Tehran who was arrested for not properly wearing her hijab. And then that death directly led to some of the biggest unrest that Iran has seen since the revolution. It's not that Raisi was directly responsible, for instance, for the hijab law or for the whole idea of Iranian women being forced to dress a certain way. Those are policies that are set way, way above him. But the way that he kind of oversaw the morality police during his tenure, I think, can be argued led directly to some of that unrest.
After the break, Yeganeh explains the impact of Raisi's death for Iran on the global stage and also inside the country. We'll be right back. So, Yeganeh, what does Raisi's death actually mean now? And first, let's talk on a global scale, because as you mentioned, a lot of these policies, especially foreign policies, are not set by the president, but he is executing on policies set above him. And Iran right now is embroiled in a lot of different global conflicts. I mean, most notably the Israel-Hamas war and escalating tensions with Israel. So how are other countries right now responding to his death?
Well, Iran has received messages of condolence from many countries. I think heads of state are sort of saying that this is a tragedy. But in terms of actual changes that this would mean for, Iran's foreign policy or its relations with different countries, this death is not going to change, those stances. Again, Iran's foreign policy is set at a much higher level. It's carried out, yes, by, Raisi and, his foreign minister who also died. But they will be replaced by sort of caretakers, and then when an election happens with a new administration. And I expect those policies to very much stay the same, particularly kind of the most controversial and sort of difficult issues that Iran is embroiled in right now, which include its support for Russia in the war in Ukraine, and then also its support for Hamas currently during the Israel-Hamas war.
Yeah, and what happens next as far as governance inside of Iran? I mean, on the one hand, I'm hearing what you're saying of you don't expect much of these things to substantially change in terms of foreign policy, but at the same time, I'm wondering if, other global leaders are looking at this as either, if they're allies of Iran of, oh no, this is a moment of potential instability, or if they are rivals or opponents of Iran of, oh, there could be some internal instability and how can we exploit that?
I would divide it into the short term and the long term. So I would say short term, there's not a huge impact, but I think longer term, there actually is quite an important impact for how Iran is governed. So the supreme leader, he's 85 years old. As I've said, he holds immense power, and whoever comes next in that role, would inherit those powers, at least nominally, at least on paper. And Raisi had been groomed for years to be at least a potential contender for that position. He had sort of risen bit by bit through these different institutions. First, he headed sort of this major financial, religious conglomerate in his hometown of Mashhad. And then he was chosen to be the head of the judiciary and now president. He didn't have a constituency. He wasn't popular among the Iranian people.
I mean, if he wasn't that popular, wouldn't that have been maybe a strategic mistake to have him be Khamenei's successor? If the whole idea is this person at the very top of the Iranian government and society and country it has to be invested with so much power. And if he's so deeply unpopular, then why would he be viewed as a potential successor?
So one other option that had been sort of bandied about and sort of discussed is actually Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who wields a lot of power from behind the scenes, though he doesn't really have sort of an official role. That carries a lot of risk because Iran's Islamic Republic was supposed to replace a hereditary kind of monarchic system. And so for the next supreme leader to be the son of the current supreme leader would be seen as quite a betrayal of kind of the revolution, I would think. In terms of the question of popularity, what was more important I believe then Raisi's popularity was sort of him being seen as a safe pair of hands, someone who's fully devoted to the system, fully in line with a certain way of thinking. Iran has many different factions. A lot of them have been pushed out of power over the last 4 decades, but there has always been a lot of disagreement about the meaning of the revolution, how the government should be run, the balance of power between the elected portions of the government and the sort of religious, unelected, theocratic portions of the government. The people who now rule Iran sort of uniformly did not want someone from sort of those rival factions, especially people who might have also been more popular with the people, to have a chance at being supreme leader. Raisi was sort of seen as an acceptable, possible alternative. It was not a shoo-in that he would be supreme leader, but he was certainly being prepared for that role. And, it would have, we don't know also if the next supreme leader is just going to be a figurehead. Of course, Iran's military has immense power now, including especially the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Would the next supreme leader have all the authority that Khamenei does, or would he be simply, a stamp of approval on whatever the IRGC wants to do? Those are questions that we still really don't know the answers to. But Raisi was kind of seen as one of very few options for ensuring kind of the longevity of the Islamic Republic over the next few decades. And that plan is now completely destroyed. It's laying at a mountain in northern Iran, and we really don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeganeh, can you talk to me more about how Iranians inside of Iran are reacting to this news, and what does that tell us about, the stability of the government or how people feel about it?
Yeah, so it's really been a remarkable reaction. What I saw yesterday and into today is just an immense amount of joy, celebration, laughter at the idea that Iran's president and foreign minister and other officials had died in this manner. And this was really Iranians sort of taking joy in something bad happening to their government. And I think that really shows you the level of polarization between at least a portion, and I would say a large portion of Iranian society and their government. However, given the government is very willing to engage in repression and quite violent repression, I don't see that as a current immediate threat to the stability of the system. I think the bigger threats lie kind of in the medium to long term. Like, this succession plan has now completely been destroyed. And how does the system start to debate? Maybe do we see the elevation of kind of a new generation of people who could possibly take Khamenei's place? That's what I'll definitely be looking for. It's just so hard to know kind of how that's going to play out.
Well, Yeganeh, thank you so much for making time and speaking with me.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me.
Yeganeh Torbati is a financial investigative reporter for The Post. She's currently writing a book about Iran, due out next year. There are a few other stories that I'm watching today. The International Criminal Court's prosecutor, Karim Khan, said Monday that he was seeking arrests against senior officials in the Israel-Gaza conflict. This includes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. This would be on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. President Biden criticized Khan's decision, calling this outrageous and adding, quote, "There is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas." The warrants still have to be approved by judges before they're issued, and that could take weeks or months. And on another note, in the U.S., Red Lobster has filed for bankruptcy. The seafood chain has already closed dozens of restaurants, citing high labor costs, expensive leases, and a disastrous change to its menu last year. It made its famous endless shrimp promotion permanent. Well, it turns out shrimp is not endless. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Bishop Sand with help from Sabby Robinson. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Monica Campbell. If you're looking to catch up on the latest updates on the big news of the day, you should check out our morning news briefing, The 7. We bring you through the 7 stories you need to know about every weekday morning by 7 a.m. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Or you can subscribe in Apple Podcasts or by following the link in our show notes. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.